Scottie and Meredith had it all planned out. Retire at 65, enroll in Medicare, start Social Security at 67. And with nearly $1.9 million saved, their plan looked rock solid. But then life happened. A few close friends suddenly passed away and got sick. And just like that, Scottie and Meredith asked the question, why are we waiting? Can we retire right now at the age of 60? And while that sounds exciting, here's the problem. The numbers don't magically line up just because the dream changes. So today we're going to stress test their plan and see if they can make early retirement work without blowing up their future financial security. Hey, what's going on, PFR Nation? Welcome to another episode of the Planning for Retirement podcast. My name is Kevin Lau. I am your host, and I'm also the owner at Imagine Financial Security. We help individuals over 50 with at least $1 million saved maximize their retirement income, minimize their lifetime tax bill, and worry less about money. If that describes you, make sure to follow the podcast and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're putting out weekly retirement-related content specifically designed for you. And listen, I know these topics can get very complicated, get a little overwhelming at times. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, do not worry. We can help you plan for and execute a successful retirement. So I'm going to share a little bit more about how to work with us later on in this episode, or you can check out the show notes if you're interested. But before we jump in, I just wanted to say thank you all for hitting 1,000 subscribers on the YouTube channel. Literally last week, I was at roughly 750 and I said, hey, PFR Nation, subscribe to the YouTube. Would love to hit 1,000 subscribers before my birthday at the end of October. Lo and behold, literally 3 days later, we hit 1,000 and counting. So I just wanted to thank you all for this. But literally the topics we come up with on the YouTube, in the podcast, it's literally from conversations we are having with all of you, with our clients, with PFR Nation, and things that are on your mind. So literally the content we make is specifically created from real life situations. And what's even great now is on the YouTube channel, the comments are flowing in and great content ideas are coming in on the YouTube comments. So if you have questions or if you have things that you want me to talk about, just interact with me. Interact with me on the Spotify webcast, interact with me on the YouTube comments. I would love to take a snapshot of your comment. And if it's a good idea, I'll put it into what I call my master content list, which it's a nice little list and it keeps on getting longer and longer. So we've got a lot of great content in the pipeline. But speaking of those client conversations, this case that we're breaking down today, this Whiteboard Retirement Plan is literally from an ongoing conversation that we're having with a couple that we work with. And I changed the facts a little bit. I changed the circumstances just a little bit just to make it clean for this Whiteboard Retirement Plan breakdown. But essentially this Scottie and Meredith, who I'm calling them, Scottie and Meredith, they had plans to work until 65, which is essentially 5 more years. And their plan was looking great, on paper, looked great. They continued to max fund 401ks, continued to save and invest wisely, continue to stay invested and stay disciplined over the next 4 to 5 years. Their plan was looking great. But as I mentioned, their situation changes and we've all gone through those life-changing events, whether it's a loss of a loved one or a friend, and it kind of just changes your perspective, and certainly when you're in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, it is very common to experience loss. Even me in my 20s and 30s, I've experienced loss of friends and family members, and it does change your perspective in terms of what is important and why am I doing what I'm doing. And in this case, the question is, why are they continuing to work? Why are they waiting? Can they retire early? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to first look at their plan, assuming they did retire at 65. Then what we're going to do is we're going to run that hypothetical. What if they did retire at 60, which is right now? How would that impact their plan? And then, spoiler alert, because it does impact their plan significantly, we're going to look at what levers they can pull in order to actually make this transition a possibility. So if you're interested in this case study, you're not going to want to miss this episode. So why don't we dive into this? Okay, so we've got Scottie and Meredith here on the whiteboard. And as I mentioned, they are both age 60 in 2025. And the plan was to work until age 65. So if you look at the summary of their goals, this is goal number 1, is they wanted to work for another 5 years initially. And so they have, this mindset of, okay, we'll get to 65 and enroll in Medicare. This is truthfully one of the biggest hangups that I see with folks that are wanting to retire early, but they have this hangup of like, hey, I'm not going to have health insurance. Cobra is super expensive. I want to maybe, I want to sort of maybe transition into retirement with as low expenses as possible. And if I have to buy private insurance, that might be a little painful. So that's a reality for them. So we'll kind of keep that in the back of our mind. But the baseline assumption is age 65, and their fixed expenses are about $6,000 on a monthly basis, or we'll annualize that and call that $72,000 per year. We built in a buffer straight away for healthcare costs. This is just the average healthcare expense that we see retirees have. And typically, this doesn't show up every single year, just from my personal experience in dealing with clients. It's kind of like, hey, 1 year may be lower than this, 1 year may be significantly higher than this. But this includes things like your Medicare Part B, your supplemental premiums, and any out-of-pocket expenses, or just payout, or just regular procedures or prescriptions that are not covered by insurance. So basically, anything out of pocket, we'll peg that. We'll round it up a little bit and call it $12,800 for healthcare. Let's ignore the LTC cost for now. That's going to be a stress test for another day, another time. We're going to first focus in on the baseline objectives here. Now, for Scottie and Meredith, of course, we're talking about Scottie and Meredith. And if you're a golf lover, you know who I'm talking about here. But for them, Scottie and Meredith, they want to travel. They want to take some golf trips in those go-go years. And so we're going to budget in an additional $25,000 on an annual basis during the go-go years. And then at age 70, we're going to slow it down a little bit, and we're going to drop that down to $15,000 per year. But that'll be phase 2. So we'll not really focus in on this number right away. But one number I did plug in here is this idea of early healthcare, because as you already know, I just mentioned at the beginning, we're going to stress test the hypothetical of them retiring at 60. So if they do that, we are going to try to accommodate for that concern in terms of increased healthcare costs early on in retirement. So the amount I built in is an additional $10,000 buffer over and above the regular healthcare costs of the $12,800. Now, one thing this does not include is they do have a mortgage. And the amount they pay on an annual basis, but all in between principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, is about $38,000 per year. So if my math is correct on this one, if we add the $72,000 plus the $12,800 plus the $25,000 plus the $10,000 plus the $38,000, I have an annual all-in out-of-pocket expense in that phase 1 of retirement. I call this phase 1 during their go-go years of $157,800. Now, this is net after taxes, so this is what they need to spend. If they are going to be pulling from tax-deferred accounts and they're going to be paying income taxes on that, we need to accommodate for this. If they're going to be pulling from taxable accounts that have some embedded capital gains they're going to be responsible for, we're going to have to accommodate for that additional tax payment on the side. So let's look at their income sources. So income sources right now, they are both employed. Scottie's salary is $205,000. Meredith is $60,000. We know the real Scottie is making a lot more than $205,000 a year. But in this case, we're looking at a total income of $265,000. Their only income source in retirement, they don't have any pension. Their only income source in retirement is going to be Social Security. Okay. And the estimates currently based on full retirement age for Scottie is $54,000. And for Meredith, it is $33,000. Okay. So for a total of $87K of guaranteed income. But this is not going to begin until full retirement age, which for both of them is at age 67 years old. Okay. So if they did retire at 65, that's only a 2-year bridge period from retirement up until Social Security. Not super painful. But if they retire at 60, now we have a 7-year bridge from the time they retire up until claiming Social Security. Okay. So it, depending on what that rate of withdrawal is, and we're going to look at their assets here in a second, that is going to be a major factor, is the timing of Social Security. Should they delay? Should they take it early? And again, I say this jokingly with every single one of the clients that we serve is, listen, tell me exactly how long you're going to live, and we'll tell you exactly when to take Social Security. But I think one step further is tell me exactly how the markets are going to perform during that bridge period, and we'll tell you exactly when to take Social Security, because that's a big factor. If you retire into a scenario where the markets are very volatile and the stocks are going down, maybe even bonds are trading down, like a 2022, that's a big problem. Maybe there's an argument to start Social Security a little bit earlier than you anticipated. On the flip side, if markets are performing well and your portfolio is taken care of, your performance on your portfolio is taking care of your cash flow needs, more power to you. Try to delay that Social Security to try to get that max benefit when you do end up claiming that benefit from Social Security. But two other income sources that I plugged in here that I currently zeroed out. Number one, Meredith self-employment income, and this ADU income. ADU stands for additional dwelling unit. Okay. Right now, one of their adult sons lives with them, and he's transitioning from college into the workforce. And so he now has a job. The plan is for him to move out of the house. And so that additional dwelling unit is going to be available. And so one option in retirement for them is to actually rent that ADU out and earn a little bit extra side income. On top of this, Meredith has been doing a little bit of like a little side hustle. She's been earning some income from an online business where I think she's doing some drop shipping, and she's making a little bit of extra income. And that actually is quite significant. Right now, I wanted to place those at zero for the baseline plan, but it's definitely one of those levers we can pull just in case their plan is falling short, especially during that bridge period, depending on the timing when they retire and when they start claiming Social Security. Why don't we look at their total net worth? Right now, their total net worth, including all of their assets minus their liabilities, is just over $2 million, of which we have some cash in the bank, about $65,000. Their total investment portfolio is just over $1.8 million, and they have a little over $100,000 in equity. And that mortgage, like we mentioned earlier, is built in as part of the plan. Now, the mortgage interest rate is not super low. It's just over 6%. They took this mortgage out within the last couple of years. So it's just over 6%. And it's one of those things that we need to weigh the pros and cons. Do they try to pay the mortgage down aggressively, or do they stay liquid and keep the funds on their balance sheet and pay as you go and sort of, let that thing amortize over the course of 30 years as they intended to? Now, no one has a crystal ball. No one can guarantee exactly what type of rate of return they're going to experience on the side, and if that's enough to take care of that 6+% interest rate. But I will say this is one of those things that it's really tough to judge right off the bat in terms of, hey, should they remove some assets from their balance sheet to pay off their mortgage? Because the challenge is their home equity is not liquid on their balance sheet. Yes, you can take out a home equity line of credit. Yes, you can do a reverse mortgage and tap into your home equity, but it's not one of those things that you plan on doing that in order to raise liquidity. Whereas money in a 401k or a cash account or a Roth account, that is money that's liquid at any point in time. And that's a lever you can pull just in case you go through some rocky times, go through an emergency, that you can tap into those funds. So right now, the baseline assumption is let's just keep that mortgage and let's pay that off over time. I believe that's another 27, 28 years in retirement. So most of their retirement, they'll have a mortgage, and let's keep their money on their balance sheet to support their lifestyle and pay that mortgage down over time. But one of the things that jumps out to me, and this is very common for a lot of the clients that we serve, is, if you look at this one here, $132,000 in tax-free accounts. Those are their Roth accounts. That's about 7% of the total investment portfolio. And then we've got 93% here in the tax deferred bucket. Okay. This is very common. Most of the folks that we serve, Roth accounts weren't even mainstream at that point in time. And even if they were, they may have not even been available inside of the 401k plan. And maybe they were making too much income in order to contribute directly into a Roth IRA. So a lot of the times that we're serving clients, most, if not all, of their assets are in the tax deferred bucket. So nothing to be super concerned about. But it's one thing I will point out, because oftentimes during that bridge period, it is helpful to have money inside of the taxable bucket that you can tap into to keep those expenses down, especially when you're looking at potentially qualifying for ACA premium tax credits, the Affordable Care Act premium tax credits, which is dependent on your modified adjusted gross income. And if you have capital gains that you're offsetting with some capital, some tax loss harvesting strategies, maybe you're just pulling from a cash account, a money market account where there are no tax implications, you can keep that income extremely low, even if you have north or upwards of $2 million in an investment portfolio, because it all matters about your modified adjusted gross income. In this case, it's a little bit tricky because yes, they've got $65,000 in the bank. That wouldn't cover a full year of that withdrawal. Remember, we looked at that earlier, just over $157,000. So it wouldn't even cover a full year. And it is nice for them to keep some money in the bank, that sleep like a baby fund. This actually, one of the comments on YouTube, we kind of went back and forth about this one. It's like, that's my new term for this one. It's a sleep like a baby fund. And he actually said, you know what? I'd rather say sleep like a teenager fund. So whatever you want to call it whatever. But it's basically that emergency fund, that sleep well at night fund. And I think that $65,000 is a nice starting point for them, because that's, not quite 6 months of their expenses, but it's close. It's a little over 3 months of their expenses in retirement. It's nice to have that in cash just in case. Okay. But right away, if we look at this, the order of withdrawal is probably going to be tapping that tax deferred bucket first, and then tapping that tax free bucket last. Okay, so we'll put that as number one in terms of order of withdrawal. So not a lot of control in terms of where the income is coming from, and all of those distributions from the tax deferred bucket, they will be treated as ordinary income taxes. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we're looking through this plan. Now, again, the baseline plan, we're assuming 5 more years of work. So 5 more years of savings contributions on top of what they have, continuing to cook and compound. We only have a 2-year bridge period with that income gap of $157,000. And then once they start Social Security, that income gap may only be around $60,000. So obviously, if we look at the plan and we look at the Monte Carlo here in just a second, it's probably not going to surprise you that they're looking pretty well funded. But first, what I want to look at is their investment allocation. We're going to assume a nice traditional investment allocation of 60-40, 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds. This is kind of that tried and true balanced portfolio. But I will say the Bill Bengen, the 4% rule, and I agree with this. A minimum equity allocation is 50%. Okay, 50%, upwards of even 75% or even more, depending on risk tolerance and risk capacity. So there's a range here. And I point this out because that is one lever we can pull as well. On top of the side hustle income, it could also be pulling this lever of investment risk, investment allocation, because if they do retire earlier, they're going to have a longer time horizon of retirement, which inflation risk, longevity risk comes into play. They could essentially increase their equity exposure. Of course, they'll experience more volatility. They'll experience more uncertainty, but it should result longer term in a higher expected rate of return, which could also improve the plan. So let's look at the Monte Carlo. No surprise here to me. Okay. We've got a 96% probability of success. So just for those of you that are not familiar with this, Monte Carlo is essentially a stress test for a bunch of hypothetical rates of return. And so we're assuming really optimistic returns, really pessimistic returns, and everything in between. And there are 1,000 hypothetical trials that are run. So what this 96% means is that 960 of those 1,000 trials, 0 adjustments to their lifestyle were needed. Very strong. Okay. I mean, I would say the sweet spot, or not the sweet spot, but if you're over 75%, that's a pretty solid number right there. Okay. I know for those of you that are overachievers, you might think, hey, 75%, that's barely a C. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about the grading scale. We're talking about the Monte Carlo simulation. But the higher percentage you go, the more certainty you're going to have, and the higher the probability you're not only going to be able to sustain your lifestyle, but you'll very much, there's a very good possibility that your asset pool, your investment pool will grow over time. And in this case, that was true. They started with $1.8 million. And in the median trial number 500 out of 1,000, they ended their plan at age 90 with $2.5 million. And I think that was one thing I actually failed to mention earlier, is that the time horizon for both Scottie and Meredith is age 90. So if they retired at 60, that's going to be a 30-year horizon. In this case, they retired at 65. So that's a 25-year time horizon. Okay. So this does not surprise me at all based on how they were tracking, based on their current investment portfolio, based on that bridge period and how short it was up until they start Social Security, and then that income gap need even after Social Security relative to their portfolio size. Not surprising at all that they fell in the 96% for the Monte Carlo, and a very nice buffer at the end for either legacy for their children or to pay for unexpected healthcare costs like long-term care down the road, or longevity risk. If one of them or both of them lived past age 90, probably be nice to have some money in the bank in order to protect against that longevity risk. But as we talked about at the very beginning, life changes. Life changes, and it did for them. Now they have this mindset of like, hey, we don't want to wait another 5 years. Who knows what might happen? Okay. And I like the fact that they are thinking this, because nobody does have a crystal ball. Okay. You can certainly work as long as you want to, and maybe you love what you do. So maybe that's not that much of a concern if you're loving what you do and you have all the flexibility in the world. But in this case, that's not what's going on. Okay. So they want to retire as early as possible. So what if they retired at the age of 60? So we pushed this thing from 65 to 60. That's the only variable we changed for them. And look what it does to the Monte Carlo. It went from 96% down to 47% on the Monte Carlo, and then 0 ending capital, $0 in the bank at age 90 Obviously not a great scenario. Okay. And I think this did surprise me a little bit in terms of the dramatic impact it had on this one. Obviously 5 years is a long time. That's 5 more years of compounding, 5 fewer years of spending, 5 fewer years of additional contributions. So I think, fewer years of the bridge period. So I think a lot of that does make sense, but I was definitely surprised that it went from 96 down to 47%. So the question is, what can they do about this? I mean, obviously, let's go under the assumption that they do not want to work under their current full-time jobs over the next any period of time. They want to get out of those right away. Okay. But one of the levers that they can pull, and let's we know one of the backdrops is the potential self-employment income, the potential ADU rental income, but let's kind of use that second. The first and foremost, what I would suggest looking at is their investment allocation, because that's one thing that you can control. You can control the amount of risk you take in the market, and they have the tolerance for risk in the market. They're not super conservative, but they're in a 60-40 portfolio. That's just where they've been. However, what if hypothetically they moved up to a 72% equity allocation? So we call this the moderately aggressive portfolio. Okay, so I switched this to both pre-retirement, which is now, as well as in retirement. So essentially, instead of being 60-40 for the duration of retirement, with the moderately aggressive allocation, they're at about 72% in equities and then about 28% in fixed income. So certainly an increase in volatility, but the trade-off there is they have an increase in expected returns. So just doing that alone actually brought them into a scenario where they're in this 53% probability of success. So more than half the trials, they never needed to make an adjustment. The other 47%, they needed to do something. Maybe it was cut spending by 5%. Maybe it was cut spending by 10%. Maybe it was cut spending by 15% or 20%. I have no idea what the scenarios are. We don't know what the future holds. No one has a crystal ball on this one. But essentially, what we know is that they're kind of just past this minimum acceptable 50% range. And actually, the Monte Carlo says their median ending portfolio value is actually $113,000. So they went from 46% with $0 at the end to 53% and $113,000 at the end. Still not an ideal scenario, okay? But it does show that increasing the equity exposure does improve the probability of success, number one. So even though more risk is taken, more volatility is had, it does improve the Monte Carlo, and it also does improve that median ending capital number that is nice to have there as a buffer to protect against some of those risks that we mentioned earlier. I think the second thing we should look at is the side hustle idea, okay? Now, because at the end of the day, the ADU, it's kind of one of those things, it's there. It's not like it's in their house. It's a separate unit. It's a separate dwelling from the property. So would it be a little bit more maintenance? Is it definitely, does it add a layer of complexity to their plan? Not only from a logistics standpoint, but also from a tax standpoint? Absolutely. But if it results in them being able to fire their boss today, not have to work in those full-time jobs today and be able to be essentially retired, but have these side hustles, I think it is worth it to them. So what we did is we plugged in some reasonable assumptions here. We plugged in $10,000 a year for the ADU. And then for Meredith, she's already hitting $2,000 a month on her side hustle. We didn't even build that as part of the baseline plan, just because what I mentioned earlier. So let's assume she does continue that and adjust that for inflation each year. So that's an additional $34,000 of income. And what we did is we made this last just during that bridge period up until age 70. Okay. So essentially from 60 to 70 years old, they are going to be earning this side hustle income. Could they continue past 70? Sure. Could they potentially stop earlier? Potentially. We'll look at the third lever that we're going to pull here in just a second to see what the impact of that is. But right away, if you look at this one, we went from 53% with just increasing risk all the way up to 75% of the Monte Carlo. And now we're at an ending portfolio value with the median trial to $1.3 million just by adding this extra income, not a substantial amount of income, but $35,000 of income, or I'm sorry, $34,000 of income. So again, I think the lesson here is you don't need to make hundreds of thousands of dollars during the bridge period. Just a little bit of supplemental income, a little bit of part-time income, a little bit of side hustle income can really help you bridge that gap from early retirement up until when you start taking Social Security. So now we're kind of we're in a better position. We're in a much better ballpark from an outcome standpoint. If they were to quit their jobs today, quit their W-2s, quit their full-time jobs today, go into this phased retirement where they're still doing the side hustle, still doing the ADU rental, and then at 70, they fully retire. But I think another lever they can pull, because they have this additional income in that bridge period from age 60 to age 70, one of the things they can do, because the life expectancy assumption in this plan is age 90, is potentially delay Social Security 3 more years. So instead of taking Social Security at 67, we have this kind of not guarantee, but we kind of have this fixed income that's going to last during that bridge period until 70. What if hypothetically, instead of taking it at full retirement age, Social Security, they delayed until 70 for both of them to get that maximum Social Security benefit? Those delayed retirement credits will increase your benefit by 8% a year, beginning at full retirement age up until age 70. Age 70, then you'll receive the max benefit. So look at what it does to this plan. The ending capital number didn't change a ton. It went from 1.32 to about 1.37, but it definitely improved that a little bit. But I think the biggest one it improved is the probability of success. And went from, 75% probability of success to 84%. So now we're at 84% of those trials, or 840 trials. No changes were needed to maintain their lifestyle, to fire the boss straight away at age 60. Okay, retire now as opposed to waiting another 5 years. And I think this is why doing the side hustle, renting out their property, renting out that additional ADU for that period of time is worth it, because now they can do some of the things that they don't have the capacity, they don't have the time to do now, because they're so busy with their day-to-day. They're so busy with their full-time jobs. They don't have the ability to do those things they want to do in retirement. So this kind of allows them to still stay a little bit involved, stay active during that bridge period, during those gap years. But better, the ideal scenario is they can fire their bosses and they can go into retirement and sort of ease into retirement, if you will. But this, in my opinion, is a great outcome. Okay. Yes, the portfolio value did decline over time, and that's because of that early rate of withdrawal, that gap period, that rate of withdrawal, which we're going to look at here in a second. But 84% is such a solid Monte Carlo number, and there still is a nice buffer there, just in case there was a long-term care need, just in case one of them lived past the age of 90. So let's assume they pulled all 3 of those levers. Okay. So let's assume this is now the new baseline plan. What I wanted to look at is just their long-term income stability ratio, as well as their rate of withdrawal over time. And so the first graph up here will break down their income sources over time. So this light green here is the supplemental income from the ADU and the side hustle business. So that ends at age 70. Okay. And then the orange is the portfolio withdrawal. So you can see much higher portfolio withdrawals during this period here. Okay. This bridge until Social Security. All right. So during that bridge period, if you look here, the rate of withdrawal starts in the low 6% range and actually climbs up north of 10%. Okay. This might be a little concerning for some of you. Okay. And I think this is one of those things that is up for debate. It's definitely up for debate. It doesn't make sense to delay Social Security with that high of a rate of withdrawal. And I think the answer lies depending on what the market does during that bridge period. If the market's performing very well, and this couple, as a moderately aggressive investor, is earning 7.5%, 8.5% a year, that could be completely acceptable, because the portfolio actually might hold up quite well. On the flip side, let's say they retired into the lost decade. Let's say they retired into a scenario like a 2000, and they went through the first 3 years with a negative rate of return, and then 2008 with a significant drop in the rate of return. So I think that's a totally different scenario where maybe it would make sense, instead of delaying Social Security until 70, maybe they do start taking Social Security during these earlier years in order to reduce that rate of withdrawal, put less pressure on the portfolio early on. But the good thing is, the modeling, if we look long term, after that bridge period is up, then the rate of withdrawal drops all the way down below 4%. Does trend a little bit upwards just because of required minimum distributions and the impact on inflation. But basically, we're in an acceptable rate of withdrawal range between 4 and essentially 5% a year, beginning at age 70, after that bridge period is up. So that's a pretty good scenario. Again, a lot can change. A lot can change with this couple. If markets are volatile, if they hit that sequence of returns risk, maybe they do pull that lever of Social Security a little bit earlier. But given the longevity in the household, given they do expect to live well into their 80s, if not 90, it probably does make sense to delay Social Security as long as they possibly can. But again, that's going to depend on, how that impacts that portfolio early on, hitting this 6, 8%, and even upwards of close to 10% rate of withdrawal. That's quite aggressive. And not many people could probably stomach that, because what you're going to see is your portfolio value dropping quite significantly, during that gap period. So you need to be comfortable with that, knowing that once this is over, then my rate of withdrawal is going to drop, and then we'll be coasting from there. But I'd love to hear from you. What levers would you pull? If you were Scottie and Meredith, what would you do? Would you do the bridge period income sources with the ADU and self-employment income? Would you delay Social Security until 70? Would you take more risk in the portfolio? Would love to hear from you what your feedback is. And finally, I know this whole planning for retirement process can be overwhelming. There's so many moving pieces, so many nuances that can make your brain hurt. And if you're looking for some help with this, and you're looking for some help or a second set of eyes to plan for and execute a successful retirement, we'd love to help you. If you want to learn more about working with our firm, you can go to our website at www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com, or you can just simply start with the retirement readiness questionnaire that is linked in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you and learn more about what's important to you, what you're looking to accomplish, and see how we can help you fire your boss. Thank you all so much for tuning in this week. Until next time, this is Kevin Lau signing off.